Today I have an exciting Tableau tutorial lined up for you. I'm going to show you how to build this. This is a dashboard that looks at how satisfied patients are with their hospitals in the year 2022. You can select all of the hospitals that were of a specific size in a specific state. So you could look at large, medium, small hospitals in your state. We're looking at Washington State medium-sized hospitals. And you can click on any hospital that you're interested in and see more information appear. This bar graph here looks at the percent of patients that rated the hospital a score of 9 or 10 out of 10 possible points, meaning that the higher the number, the more satisfied the patient. Over here we have the survey response rate, so of all the patients that went to that hospital, what percentage of them filled out this survey. Here we have number of completed surveys for the year 2022 for the selected hospital, and then also for the selected hospitals we can see the individual answers to some of the questions on the survey that was administered, and we can see the weakest points up here and the strongest points down here. We also have that same idea applied to this data visualization down below, where the hospital lights up and you can see how they compare to the other hospitals within their cohort. Were they ahead of the pack, or were they behind the pack? The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, collects all this data from hospitals through a survey called HCAHPs. Now, most hospitals are required to administer the HCAHPs survey and give this to a sample of their patients. So it asks questions like, was the hospital always clean at night? Did doctors always communicate well to their patients? Did nurses always communicate well? Did the nurses and doctors always treat you with respect? Now I have a video where I talk about HCAHPs and I explain how a program called value-based purchasing looks at patient satisfaction through HCAHPs as well as other measures of patient quality to award or penalize the hospital for the quality of care that they provide. So I'd highly recommend that you check out that video if you want to understand the context behind the HCAHPs data. I would also recommend that you check out the data cleaning video before this one because it will show you how to prepare all of this data in SQL. But if you want to skip that step, that's fine. I'm going to make it easy for you to just get the completed data set so that you can just jump right into the Tableau tutorial. To get the files that you're going to need to follow this tutorial, you just need to go to the link that I provide in the description down below, but you can also go to datawizardry.academy, click on resources in the top bar, and you should see an option for this patient satisfaction dashboard, or it might also be called HCAHPs dashboard. And once you get that file, it's going to be zipped. So once you unzip it, you'll see 3 files here. You don't need to worry about these other 2 here. We just need to worry about Tableau file.csv, which is the completed Tableau data source that we're going to use. These other 2 things are going to be for the tutorial before this, where I show you how to clean that data and how to merge it together to create this file. So if you're doing the tutorial before this, you will end up using these files to create this. Alright, so I've got Tableau loaded and I'm going to connect my data source. So I'm going to go to text file, not Microsoft Excel, but text file. And I'm going to find this Tableau file.csv. I'm going to click open. And what we have here is a preview of the data. Now, if you're just joining me from the previous tutorial where we do data cleaning, you might be looking at these first 3 columns and you might say, hey Josh, what happened? It looks like our cleaning didn't really stick for these 3 columns. Don't worry about that. I'm going to get to that in a second. For now, I'm going to talk about these other columns. Facility ID is just a remnant from the file that we were cleaning in the previous video, and it's just a duplicate of provider CCN. They're both the same thing. So I'm just going to click on this little arrow here, and I'm just going to click hide. Facility name is pretty self-explanatory. That's just the name of the hospital that we're looking at. We have the address of that hospital, the city, the state, the zip code, the county, the telephone number. HCAHPs measure ID is just a metric identification number that's going to uniquely identify every single thing that was asked on the survey. HCAHPs question is just going to be the full question that was asked. You can see the full wording there. HCAHPs answer description is an abbreviated or shortened version of the HCAHPs question. Scrolling to the right, we've got HCAHPs answer percent. And what that is simply the percent of patients that provided a specific answer on that HCAHPs answer description. So for example, patients are going to be asked the question, did the nurses communicate with you well? And it's going to be like, did they always communicate with you well? Or did they sometimes or never communicate with you well? Or did they usually communicate with you well? You can see these first 3 entries here, and that's going to add up to 100% because there's only 3 possible answers for that question. Each hospital is going to have the number of total surveys that the patients filled out for this start and end date period, which is 2022. So each hospital is going to be different. And we see that number repeated because the patients had a bunch of possible different answers for some of the same questions. So we're going to see this number repeat quite a bit before it moves on to the next hospital. Survey response rate is just going to tell us the percentage of all the patients seen in that hospital in the year 2022 that ended up filling out this HCAHPS survey. Start date and end date is the collection period for the HCAHPS survey for each hospital, but they're all going to be 2022. Number of beds is the quantity of beds that that hospital has. So we're going to use that to size out our hospitals into different cohorts, which are going to be small, medium, and large. These 2 dates over here are just going to tell us when was this last submitted to CMS. How up to date is this information about the number of beds? Now this start date and end date for the HCAHPS report period is just a repeat of these 2 columns over here. So I'm just going to click on this down arrow and I'm going to say hide for this one and hide for that one. Scrolling back to the left, we've got our start date converted and end date converted. And if you're just joining me from the data cleaning video in the previous session, we know that we had to convert the dates from this format to a year dash month dash day format so that SQL would actually recognize that as a date. But then once we imported it into Tableau, it converted back to the format that we had before. And that's okay because it still recognizes it as a date, so our efforts weren't squandered. It's just presenting the date in a different format now. And then CCN, that is the CMS certification number. It's going to uniquely identify one hospital from another, and it has to be 6 digits. Now, in the previous session, I explained how these CCN numbers are supposed to be 6 digits in length. So if you see anything that's 5 digits in length, what happened is when the data touched Excel, Excel has this annoying habit of removing leading zeros from the identification number. So we used a function to add the zeros back in. Now, those zeros are still there, but now Tableau is chopping them off, and I'll show you how to bring those zeros back in. All right, now that we've gone over the whole data set here, let's click on sheet 1 to start building a data visualization. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on provider CCN, and I'm going to go to default properties, and I'm going to say number format, custom, and I'm going to say 0000000. I'm going to put 6 zeros in there. That's going to add in the leading zeros whenever the CCN number is short 6 digits, and the implication being that Excel or Tableau chopped off some of those zeros. We're just going to add those back in. So to show that that works, I'll just take my provider CCN, go here, and right click, and then I'm going to say dimension, and then right click again, discrete. Now you can see that leading zero appears when the CCN is short 6 digits. We don't need this anymore, so now I'm just going to click this button to clear out of everything. Now let's look at the breakdown of the questions on HCAHPS. If I drag HCAHPS questions to rows, you're going to see that we have tons of questions here. I don't necessarily care about every single possible answer on every single question, because remember that for each question there's going to be multiple possible answers. There's going to be, did we sometimes do these things? Did we never do these things? Did we usually do these things? Or do we always do these things? We're interested in the always. That is called the top box answer. So we're really only interested in the top box answers. So for those top box answers, we can easily identify them if we just create a calculation. So to do that, I'm going to go to Analysis up here, Create Calculated Field, and I'm going to pull in this HCAHPS question that we have displayed here. So I'll pull that in like this, and I'm going to create an if statement. And it looks like this. If HCAHPS question, I'm going to put contains, this function contains, it's going to look for a certain wording in this column, HCAHPS question. So I'll give it a comma, I'm going to give it some quotes here, and I'm going to say always. I'm going to close that function. So if it contains always, or, and then I'll copy this, Control C and then Control V over here, and if it contains not always but 9, just the number 9, then, and we'll say it's 1, I'll just give it 1, else 0, end. And we'll call this top box. Okay, so what this is doing is it's looking for the wording always, or it's looking for the number 9 for 9-10 out of 10, which is another top box answer. Did you rate the hospital 9 or 10 out of 10? Like this one right here, if you can see it. So I'll hit apply and I'll click OK. I'll drag top box to filters here. I'm going to go to all values, click next. I'm going to set this equal to 1. And now this gets trimmed down just to those top box answers for the HCAHPs questions. I'm just going to call this top box answers, and we'll just use this for our reference, but it's not actually going to make its way into the final dashboard. So now I'm going to build a bar graph. So to build a bar graph, I'm going to go to this new sheet, this new worksheet button. I want my bar graph to be a horizontal bar graph. I want the bars to be going this way like this, not upright. And I'm going to show you a problem that we're going to encounter when we start to build this bar graph. But first I'm going to take the facility name, drag that to rows, add all members. We got a lot of hospitals showing up here. I don't necessarily want all of them. So I'm going to go to state, drag that to filters, and I'll just pick one for now. I'll pick Washington State, hit apply, okay. I'm going to right click, I'm going to show that filter, and then I'm going to go over here and then select single value drop down so that we can toggle easily between the different states. So now we're going to take HCAHPs answer percent, and that's going to be the percentage of patients that provided a certain answer for the various HCAHPs questions. I'll drag that to text, and right now the numbers are nonsensical. And the reason for that is because these hospitals each have multiple rows of data because we have multiple answers for multiple questions on the HCAHPS survey, and it's just adding these percentages up constantly without us specifying a specific answer on a specific question. That can be easily fixed by just going to HCAHPS answer description. I'm just going to drag that here, and I'm just going to look for that 9. So patients who gave a rating of 9 or 10, I'll click that and I'll hit apply. Click OK. I'm going to go down to this tab here and I'm going to say percent of patients rating hospital 9-10. All right, and then I click here, and then that's going to update up here. So we are looking at the percentage of patients for each hospital rating the hospital the best possible score. But when you look over to the right here, it's not really in a percentage format. It's like this whole number format, 58, 62. We want that to say 58%. We want the percentage symbol next to that. So what we can do is we can create a new calculated field. And I'm just going to drag HCAHPS answer percent over here. I'm going to divide that by 100, and I'll just call this actual HCAHPS answer percent. And I'll hit apply, okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this HCAHPS answer percent pill. I'm going to right click, replace references, and I'm going to replace it with actual HCAHPS answer percent. And now it is converted. And when I look at this, technically 0.5800 is 58%, but it looks kind of ugly. Like I want it to just say 58%. So to fix that, let's just go over to this green pill, right click, format, go to numbers, and we'll click on that drop down, go to percentage. We're going to bump decimal places down to 0. And that looks better. Now, we still have a ton of hospitals in Washington State that I don't necessarily want to look at all at once. So I'm going to close out of this, and I'm going to start creating a calculation that's going to split out these different hospitals by small hospitals, medium hospitals, large hospitals, and I'm going to do that based off of the number of inpatient beds that they have. Go to analysis, create calculated field, and I'm going to call this hospital size. And I'm going to say that if the hospital is greater than 500 beds, it's large. So if, and then I'll say number of beds is greater than or equal to 500, then large. Else if number of beds is greater than or equal to 100 and number of beds, can't spell today, number of beds is less than 500, then medium. Else if number of beds is less than 100, then small, end. So I'll hit apply, okay. Now I'm going to take the hospital size that we just created and I'm going to drag that to filters and I'm going to look at the medium size hospital. So I'll hit apply and here's the medium hospitals in Washington state. This combination of state and hospital size is going to form our cohort that we're going to use to compare one hospital to other hospitals. I'm going to go ahead and right click on state, apply to worksheets, and I'm going to say all using this data source. Drag this actual HCAHPs answer percent over to columns, and I'm going to go to this descending button and I'm going to sort that in descending order. Now, one thing you might have noticed is columns and rows. What is that referring to? Well, it's not actually referring to the columns of data that we have from our data set over here. Instead, what that's referring to is how we're going to orient the data visualization. You can think of rows as the rows in your data visualization and the columns as the columns in the data visualization. Rows is occupied by a facility name. So facility name is going to be listed out as each row here. And then columns you can think of as like a slice of that percentage for the HCAHPs answer percent. That's just, it's giving it a slice in the horizontal direction. It's building that bar graph. It's stretching it out in a horizontal way. I like to remind myself how things are going to be oriented by looking at these icons here. Those columns are kind of lined up next to each other, upright, and the rows are kind of stacked vertically. So if I were to click this button, which will swap the order, you can see that the graph is now upright because now the rows are occupied by the actual percentages for the HCAHPS score, and then facility name is not a row anymore, it's a column. It's going to be listed in horizontal fashion. But I'm just going to click this to revert it back to its original format. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's go ahead and give this bar graph a little bit more color. I'm going to take these percentages here. I'm going to hold down the control key. I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag it to color. Then I'm going to click on the color box and then go to edit colors. And I'll scroll down to red, blue, white diverging. I'll click this and I'll put 6 steps and I'll hit apply. And I think Tableau is pretty good about sensing where the middle point is. You can see that it starts to split between blue and red here. Darker blue colors to the top performing hospitals and a dark shade of red for the bottom performing hospitals. We don't need this axis label because it's already pretty clear from these labels and this label what this is displaying. So you can just right click here and just unclick show header to make that go away. And I want these percentages to appear in the center of my bars. So to do that, I'll go to label, I'll click on label, go to alignment, and then I'll just click this center option right here. But this is kind of hard to see. I found that when you expand the bar width, it tends to be a little bit more adaptive in making it easier to see on the bar. So I'll show you what I mean by that. If you just hover over Swedish Medical Center and Legacy Salmon Creek, you should see these bi-directional arrows appear. Just kind of drag that down a little bit until you start to see this better coloration for those percentages. I'll click on label and I'm just going to make this bold and maybe I'll increase the size of these center percentages here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this out a little bit. I'm going to right click on these facility names. So just pick one of them, right click, go to format, and you're going to go to this paint bucket icon. You'll go down to header. I'm going to select this middle gray here. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to right click up here, go to format, and then I'm going to go to shading and I'll pick that same middle gray. I'll double click on this. I'm going to make this bold, Tableau medium font, and I think the size is good there. I'm going to pick a medium gray. So I'll click apply, okay. We don't really need this facility name here because it's already very apparent that these are all hospitals. It says so right here in the title. So right click, hide field labels for rows. I think it would be nice if this text popped out a little bit more, if it was a little bit darker. So I'm just going to right click again on any of these hospitals, format, go to this font here. We'll pick a 10 size and then we'll say Tableau medium, bold. That looks better. And the last finishing touch for formatting here, I don't really like this tooltip here. I don't think it really contributes anything. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. So just go to tooltip and then just unclick all these boxes here. So now we don't have a tooltip appear anymore because it's already pretty clear what we're looking at. Now this is looking really snazzy, but remember that I mentioned that there's a problem with this bar graph. And to show you what I mean by that, I'm going to just go up here for a second. I'm going to go to my filters for Washington State. I'm going to hit Edit Filter. I'm going to pick All, hit Apply, and now you'll notice there's this hospital called St. Joseph Medical Center. What the heck? It says 252%. That's not possible. There can only be 100% maximum. Well, what's happening is if I right-click on this and I go to View Data, and then I go to Full Data, you'll notice that there's 4 hospitals here that each have, and I'm going to click Show Fields, and I'll find the CCN number here, click that. They each have different CCN numbers. So each is a different hospital, and it's getting added up 4 times. So what the heck is going on here? Well, we want to make sure that St. Joseph Medical Center is uniquely identifying the hospital, but it's spelled the same for each 4 of these hospitals. So what we need to do is we need to replace the facility name with something that combines the name with the CCN number, the CMS certification number. We're going to concatenate these 2 columns together so that it uniquely identifies every single hospital in this bar graph. Let's go to Analysis, Create Calculated Field, and I'll just drag in the facility name plus, and then single quotes. I'm going to have a space there, and maybe I'll put in a dash as well with a space on each side, plus, and I'll find that provider CCN. That's a numeric column though, and I need to convert it into a text-based column. So I'll just put str, that's short for string, which is the same thing as a text-based column. It's just basically going to take this thing and it's going to convert it to a string or a text-based field, and I'll call this Hospital Complete Name. I'll hit Apply, OK. I'm going to go up to the facility name. I'm going to right-click here, Replace References, and then I'll look for that new column that we created, Hospital Complete Name, click OK. So now everything is uniquely being represented here, but it looks a little crazy, so I'm going to switch this back to Washington State. So Edit Filter, None, and then I'm going to go to Washington State, hit Apply. That looks better. I think we're just about done with this data visualization, so I'm going to hop into my completed dashboard, and I'm going to show you what we're going to work on next. I want us to work on this thing next, and what that's going to do is we're going to look at each of the individual top box answers for the HCAHPs questions, and we're going to look at the delta. So in other words, for each top box answer to each of the HCAHPs questions, we're collecting all of the percentages for each of the hospitals on each question. So that's going to give us an average for the cohort, and then we're going to see how did the selected hospital compare to that average. Did the hospital do better, in which case there will be a positive delta, or did they do worse, in which case there will be a negative delta. So in this case, Swedish Issaquah, which is currently selected, if we look at the HCAHPS answer, patients always receive call button help as soon as they wanted. This is Swedish Issaquah's weakest feature. They are 6.5 percentage points below their cohort of medium-sized hospitals in Washington State. So, for example, that might look like the average being 70% for all medium hospitals in Washington State on average, and Swedish scoring at 63.5%, with a difference, a delta of negative 6.5%. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to jump back into our workbook. So I'm back on our first data visualization that we built, and to kind of expedite things with the formatting and such, I'm just going to right click and I'm just going to duplicate. I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to call this question delta from mean cohort percentage. And I'm going to pop in the HCAHPS answer description to the right. Let's go ahead and go to this filter here. I'm going to left click, edit filter. I'm going to select all of these, but I'm going to filter that down with this top box calculation that we created earlier. So take this top box and drag it over here, go to all values, and then make that a 1 and hit apply. Then drag out this hospital complete name. I'm also going to take out this thing here and these things here. I'll also take this hospital complete name and I'm going to apply it to the filters here. And I'll just pick a relevant value. So I'll click this box up here, only relevant values, and I'll pick, let's say, Harrison Medical Center. That's just going to be a placeholder for a little bit. Eventually we're going to get rid of this. And let's take this actual HCAHPS answer percent and drag it over here. Now, What we are currently looking at is Harrison Medical Center's percent performance on each of the top box answers for the HCAHPs questions. What we really need is that delta, and the delta is going to require two ingredients. It's going to require this for the individual hospital performance, and for the second ingredient, we're going to need to calculate these same scores, but for the average for the cohort. Okay, so for this thing, it's going to need to be the average performance of all those hospitals in Washington state that are medium sized. Then we need to do it again for this one and for this one. And once we have those two values, we can take Harrison Medical Center's individual score and subtract out the average for the cohort, and that will give us our delta. But that data lives in two places. Right now we're looking at Harrison Medical Center. To see the full cohort for the top box answers, we need to pull this out so that it's not looking at Harrison Medical Center anymore. Right click here and then make that the average. So this data lives in two places. How do we bring them together to calculate this delta? It turns out that we're going to need to build something into our calculation called a partitioning statement, and that's going to independently look up the cohort average in our calculation regardless of what's displayed here. So I'm going to explain how that works once I build a calculation, but before I do any of that, I'm just going to go back to my hospital complete name, drag that to filters, go back to select from list, click none, and then I'm going to type Harrison Medical Center. I'm just going to reapply that. So I'm going to build a calculation now. So go to Analysis, Create Calculated Field. I'm going to go over here to pull the actual HCAHPs answer percent. I'm not going to pull it from here because I don't want to aggregate it right now. I'm going to subtract, and then this is where we get into our level of detail calculation. I'm going to use these curly brackets. That's going to mean that this is a level of detail calculation. There are actually multiple kinds, but I'm going to use fixed. So I'll type fixed, colon, and then I'm going to pull in the state. So I'll pull state, I'll pull the hospital size. You're going to need to separate these by commas. And then I also need to pull in this HCAHPs answer description, and I'll separate that with a comma. And then I'm going to say average, so AVG, parentheses, and then brackets, and then actual HCAHPs answer percent. I'll hit apply. I'm going to call this question delta from mean cohort. Hit apply again. Okay, so let's break down what this is doing. I'm going to move this up a little bit. With this fixed calculation here, Tableau is kind of bypassing the constraints of this visual, which is currently restricted to Harrison Medical Center. Instead, it's going into our data set and independently looking up the average value of all the hospitals within this cohort. It's going through all of those hospitals for each of these HCAHPs answers, and it's doing that for the combination of the state that we have and the hospital size that we have. So going through each of the answers, it's saying for all those hospitals that are Washington State medium-sized hospitals, what does each hospital contribute to this question and to this question and to this question? And it's calculating the average of all those percentages. Then, we don't see this, but then it moves on to the next hospital size, large hospitals in Washington State, and then it does it again. Goes to small hospitals and it does it again. Moves on to a different state, then it does it again. We've got all of these average values computed for this combination of things. And so what that's going to allow us to do is we can subtract that from this one over here, and currently we don't have to use a level of detail for this because all that stuff is already specified in this data visualization. This is already looking at Harrison Medical Center's individual contribution to each of these top box answers. So all we got to do is use that and then subtract out the cohort average for each of these top box answers. Hopefully that makes sense. It is a little complicated, so it might take you a couple practice sessions with level of detail to really fully appreciate how it works, but if it doesn't make sense so far, don't worry too much about it. Let's just go ahead and click OK. Now we can drag that into this data visualization. So I'll just take this out because we don't need it anymore, and I'll take that question delta from mean cohort and I'll drag it to text. And I'm going to sort this in ascending order. And I'm going to right click here. I'm going to go to format, and then I'll go to numbers and then percentage. Now what this is doing is it's basically saying how far were we from the mean. If it's negative, that means that we're below the cohort. In fact, we're negative 2.76 percentage points below the cohort for patients who gave a rating of 9 or 10. But for these positive numbers, we're doing well. And for this one at the bottom, we're doing really well. Harrison Medical Center was 5.42% above the cohort mean for always quiet at night. Now we don't actually need this patients who gave a rating of 9 or 10 because we already measured that in our previous bar graph that we built. So I'll just right click here and then I'll click exclude. Now this looks pretty boring, so I want to give this some color. I'm going to hold down the control key. I'm going to drag my delta to color, and then I'm going to click this drop down under marks, and I'm going to look for square. And that looks pretty good, but I want to mirror the same color scheme that I had in the other data visualization. So I'll go to color, edit colors. I'm going to look for my red, blue, white diverging. I'm going to make this 6 steps, hit apply. That looks good. I'll click OK. And I think we're finally ready to move on to the next data visualization. I have jumped back into my finished dashboard to show you the next thing we're going to build, and that's this hospital delta per question versus cohort. So a similar idea to this visualization that we just built. What we're doing now is we're taking that delta and then we're looking at all of the hospitals within the cohort, and we're making it so that the selected hospital lights up so that we can see where it stands among all the other hospitals. Are they ahead of the pack? Are they behind the pack? Are they kind of in the middle? There's going to be this blue coloration when they're above the cohort and this red coloration when they're below. I'm going to show you how to build this visualization with the dots, but I'm not quite yet going to show you how to make these things light up because we're going to save that for last when everything is assembled onto the dashboard. We're back in our workbook, and I'm going to right click on our newly created data visualization, and I'm going to duplicate, and I'm going to title this Cohort Hospital Delta Spread. All right, so to build this next data visualization, this is going to be fairly easy. I don't really care about the color right now, so I'm just going to take this pill without holding the control key, and I'm just going to drag it to columns. It's going to remove the color, and it's going to widen out our visualization to create an x-axis that's going to measure that delta. So we've measured out the delta on the x-axis. Now I'm going to remove this filter that's looking at just one hospital at a time. So I removed that, and I'm going to put this hospital complete name on detail. What that does is it's pulling in all of the hospitals now into this data visualization, but they're represented by squares, and I don't like how they look, so I'm just going to go to this drop down and I'm going to select circle. Then I'm going to take off the labeling that's happening here by just removing this delta from label. I'll just drag this off like this. I'm going to pick a dark gray color for these different circles here, so I'll just go to color, and I'll pick this middle gray, and that's looking good so far. Let's adjust the axis now. I'm going to right click, edit axis, and I'm going to call this percent points above / below cohort mean. All right, so that looks good. Right click again. We're going to go to format, and then on this axis tab, make sure that the numbers are displaying as a percentage. And I'm going to remove any decimal places that this has so that's a little bit more readable. I'm also going to right click here, format, and I'm going to make sure that this font here is a little bit darker so that it pops out a little bit more. Maybe I'll give it this darkness instead, and I'll make it bold. Drag this out a little bit so we can see more of the answers on here. I'm going to left align this so it looks a little bit nicer. That looks better. I'm going to drag this out a little tiny bit more. There we go. We're at a good stopping point with this, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the next thing that we're going to visualize. But first, an exciting announcement.
Now, if you're liking this tutorial so far, I'm excited to announce that I will be launching a free 1-hour webinar where I will outline all the things you need to do to become a data analyst in healthcare. Pivoting into data analytics can be very tricky. So in this webinar, I'm going to outline all of the technical skills you need to learn, how to acquire the domain knowledge in the industry, some networking secrets, as well as how to strategically look for positions that will increase your chances of landing your dream job as a data analyst in healthcare. If you want to check that out, click this link to sign up for that webinar. If you aren't able to attend the live version of this webinar, I will record the video so that you can watch it later. All right, let's get back into things.
I have jumped back into the finished dashboard just to show you the final 2 data visualizations that we're going to build. They're these 2. They're going to be super quick, And then once that's done, we'll be ready to start assembling the pieces of our dashboard. I'm going to right click on this tab here, and I'm just going to say duplicate, and I'm going to call this survey response rate. Go ahead and take this out, take this off, take this off. Go to the marks drop down and say text. Remove the top box from filters. Remove HCAHPs answer description. Now, earlier on in this tutorial, we had to convert HCAHPs answer percent to an actual percentage by dividing it by 100 because it was in a whole number format, not a percentage format. Well, it's the same issue with survey response rate percent. We need to do the same thing with this. And that's easy because all we need to do is just analysis, create calculated field. I'll just drag this in, divide by 100, and then I'll just call this actual survey response rate percent. And I'll hit apply and OK, and then I'll drag that to text, and I'm going to right click here. I'm going to make sure that this is the average, then right click again, format, and then go to percentage. And I'll make that 2 decimal places. Sounds good. I'm going to move this size up a little bit, but then I need to expand out this imaginary box that's cutting off the actual percentage there. It's just showing pound, pound, pound because it doesn't have enough space. So I'm going to drag out this imaginary box until it's actually visible. That looks complete, so I'm going to go down to this tab here, right click, duplicate, and we're going to work on the last data visualization. I'll call this one number of completed surveys, and so this is just going to give you the total number of the surveys for the hospital that is selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this thing off, and I'll just search for the number of completed surveys, which is right here, drag that to text, and then drag that imaginary box out again until all those numbers appear. Oh, but we've got 2,334,000 here. Well, that's because we don't have a hospital selected on this data visualization. So I'll just pick the hospital complete name. I'm just going to look for Harrison Medical Center again. Click that one, hit apply, OK. This number is still quite large though. And the reason for that is if I right click and I go to view data, I go to full data, and I scroll to the right here, you'll notice that Harrison Medical Center is getting repeated multiple times because remember, in our data set, the hospital is going to show up multiple times for each of the answers for each of the HCAHPs questions. So naturally, number of completed surveys is just going to be repeated multiple times. This is just looking at all of the completed surveys for the year 2022. So we don't want this to get added up multiple times. Instead, we want this aggregation here to only represent this number once. So you could use a min, you could use a max, you could use an average. Those 3 things will do the same thing. I'm just going to close out of this, right click, and then go to measure and then average, and then that should give us 687. I don't want this decimal point here, so I'll just right click, format, go to numbers, custom, and then remove the decimal places. Well, we're in the home stretch. We just need to assemble our dashboard now, and then we have to kind of coordinate the selections of the hospitals to affect all the other different data visualizations. And then we're going to put on the finishing touches to this dashboard and just double check for formatting and so forth. So let's build a dashboard. I'm going to go to this tile right here. I'm going to click that to create my dashboard, and I'll call this HCAHPs dashboard. Then I'm going to go to size here, and I'm going to pick fixed size, and I'll pick generic desktop. That's just a go-to size that I usually pick. And now these sheets here are going to be the things that we're going to drag on to this dashboard. I'm going to start with my percent of patients rating hospitals 9-10. So I'm going to take that and I'm just going to drag it right here. I'm going to click on the data visualization here and going to click on more options, and then I'll click filters. I'll go to state, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to pick hospital size. And then for this, I'll click on this and I'll do a single value drop down. And I don't want this all option to appear, so I'm going to click on that, and then I'll say customize and unclick this show all value. That will remove that all option. I'm going to go to this and then click on more options and then single value drop down, and I'm going to do the same thing where I remove the all here. So go to more options, customize, unclick the show all value. Let's click on the negative space here and then push this over here until you see this gray box emerge on the left half of the dashboard, and we're going to drag that down a little bit till it's like maybe this width here. Next, I'll take this question delta for mean cohort, just plop it in right over here where you have this gray box emerge on the right half of the dashboard. And then I'm going to take this one, I'm going to drag it right below until it looks like this. And I'm going to play with the formatting a little bit. I'm going to click on this more options, fit, and then fit width, and that's going to stretch it out a little bit more. You'll notice that header kind of filled up all the space here. I'm going to do the same thing up here. Go to more options, fit width. I'm going to take the survey response rate, I'm going to put it in right up here. I'm going to do that again for this one, and I'm going to put it right next door. Then I'm going to do that fit width again. So I'll do that, and then I'll do that. I'm going to drag this up a little bit. I'm going to drag this maybe a little bit more up as well. I don't need these color schemes here, so I'm just going to click out of that, click on this, click out of that. I like this to be filled in with a color, so I'll left click here, go to layout, and then I'm going to fill this in with a medium gray background like that. I'm going to stretch this out to the right a little bit more so that more of this text is appearing and these data values are a little bit smaller. This is a little lopsided, and I think I changed my mind about making that fit width. I'm going to make that fit entire view so that it's occupying the center here. And I'll do the same thing over here just so it matches. Next, I'm going to bring in the title of the dashboard. So I'll click on this text for objects and I'll drag it right up here until you see this tiny, tiny sliver on the top portion of the dashboard. For now, I'll call this HCAHPs patient satisfaction scores, but we're going to add a little thing to the left of this that's going to show the selected hospital once we add that functionality. But let's blow this up to like maybe size 15, bold, medium darkness, and then Tableau medium like that. Then that's going to blow up a little bit. I'm just going to stretch that back to a normal size right there. I'm going to left click here, layout, and then I'm going to pick another medium gray color just like that. The edge of this thing here is not flush with this thing, so to fix that I'm going to left click here, go to outer padding, and I'm going to set the outer padding to 4 on all sides. So now this side is flush with that side. You can stretch these bars down a little bit so that more of the CCN numbers are appearing. But this is going to vary when you're selecting different states and so forth, so you just got to play with it until it looks right. On this data visualization, I want the 0% section, which represents our mean performance of the hospitals. I want the left of that to be a warm color, and I want the right of that to be a sort of bluish color. So one's punitive and one's good. So I'll just right click on the axis here and I'll say add reference line. And then we'll go to this fill above and fill below option. For fill above, I'm going to pick this blue, and then for fill below, I'm going to pick this orange, and then click OK. All right, so the next thing I want to look at is the functionality of this dashboard when I play with these filters. When I switch from Washington to, say, Wisconsin, I notice that this bar graph updates and these things are updating, but this stuff looks weird. And then if I try to switch between large and medium, this thing changes, but that thing doesn't change. There's some inconsistencies here. For now, I'm just going to switch back to Washington medium hospitals, but I'm going to show you a trick to enforce some consistency among all of these data visualizations. First, I'm going to jump into this bar graph that we built by just clicking on it and then clicking Go to Sheet. Earlier on, I enforced this rule where I right-clicked on state, and then I said Apply to Worksheets, and I said All using this data source. So when we're selecting the state from that drop-down on the dashboard, all the other data visualizations are following that rule where it has to be Washington State or Wisconsin or Texas or whatever state we're selecting. But we didn't enforce that same rule for hospital size. So I'll right-click and I'll go to Apply to Worksheets and I'll say All using this data source. Now, when I click between each of these data visualizations, they both share whatever is selected. Washington State medium-sized hospitals, Washington State medium-sized hospitals, Washington State medium-sized hospitals. It's all matching. I'm going to return back to my dashboard. Now what I want to do is I want to click on these bars and have that update everything. Now, for those of you who are a little bit more practiced with Tableau, you might think, well, I could just use this Use as Filter button and then click here and this updates and that updates and that updates. Well, it doesn't quite do what we want it to do because all those circles that used to be there disappear. So we're going to have to set this up in a different way. We'll go ahead and unclick my Use as Filter button here. and I'm going to consider building a parameter. So I'm going to hop into this data visualization by clicking on it and then go to Sheet, and we're going to need to create a parameter. So go to this arrow here and then say Create Parameter, and I'm going to make this a string. I'll call this Hospital List. This is going to be a list right here. I'm going to click that list button, and then I'm going to go to Add Values From, and I'm going to say Hospital Complete Name. So what that's doing is it's pulling all of the hospital names where we combined the name of the hospital with the CMS certification number. It's just going to appear as a drop-down list. I'm going to click OK, right-click, Show Parameter. It's going to show up over here. So it's just this list, but it's not doing anything when I click on it because it hasn't been connected with a calculation yet. So to make it do something, I'm going to go to Analysis, Create Calculated Field. I'll take our hospital complete name and drag it over here, and I'll say that has to be equal to, and I'll take my parameter and then I'll drag it over to the right. Now what that's going to do is it's going to say whatever value is stored here, that's going to be compared against the actual hospital complete name, and if it matches, then it's true. If it does not match, it is false. And when I drag that calculation over to filters, I'm going to set it to true so that it enforces this rule that whatever I have selected here has to equal hospital complete name. So it'll basically just act as if I right-clicked and added that filter over here as a drop-down. And you'll see that in a few minutes it's going to be a really useful feature. So I'll just call this Hospital Check, hit Apply, and then OK. I'm going to drag my newly created Hospital Check over to this Filters section, and I'm going to say that this is true, and I'll hit Apply. Now I'm going to drag off this Hospital Complete Name. I don't need it. The reason that this shows up as blank right now is because we have Adventist Health Lodi Memorial selected, which is not a Washington State medium-sized hospital. So I'm just going to go down until I see Harrison Medical Center, which we had been using before. Here it is, so I select it, and then it's showing up again. Now that Hospital Check is enforcing this rule to only show the hospital that's selected on this dropdown, I'm going to right-click and I'm going to apply this to worksheets, but this time I'm not going to say all using this data source. I only want this to affect the survey response rate and the number of completed surveys. So I'll click here and I'll do just that. I'll select survey response rate and number of completed surveys and click OK. Let's just hop into survey response rate, see what we got here. We got Hospital Check true, medium-sized hospitals, Washington State, that looks good. I'll jump into number of completed surveys. Washington State hospitals, medium size. We don't want this hospital complete name competing with Hospital Check, so I'll drag that off. Let's return to the HCAHPs dashboard. And now what I need to do is I need to actually enable this quick functionality to update these graphs here. And I also need this thing to glow. So to do that, I need to create a parameter action. So I'll show you how that works. I'm going to go to Dashboard, I'm going to go to Actions, and I'm going to say Add Action, and I'll say Change Parameter. So I'm going to unselect this stuff here, and I only want the source sheet to be number of patients rating hospital 9-10 out of 10. The target parameter is just going to be hospital list, and the source field is just going to be hospital complete name. Now, let me break down everything that's going on here. What this is saying is we're targeting a parameter called hospital list. That's the thing that's going to be affected. The source field is going to be the hospital complete name. So when we click on something containing the hospital complete name, it's going to feed that value into target parameter. And it's only going to do that with this data visualization right here. So once it stores that value, that parameter is going to get updated, and then it's going to affect that hospital check calculation for this thing and this thing and this thing, and those are going to update. So I'll click OK, I'll click OK again, and then when I do this, these things update. Now we need to get this thing to highlight the hospital that represents the thing that we've clicked on for each of these HCAHPs top box answers. Before I forget though, I'm going to show how easy it is to add in a dynamic name based off of what you've clicked here. So double click on this. I'm going to pull in that parameter that we have here, and I'm going to put in a dash, and I'll make this maybe a blue color. Maybe I'll pick this blue here, click OK. So now we can see whatever is selected, the name also shows up here. So that's pretty nice. Another thing that needs to be adjusted before I forget, notice that even though this hospital is doing well on these things here, they're getting these punitive colors here. I don't necessarily want that, so I'm going to go into this sheet here. I'm going to update this coloration by going to Color, Edit Colors. I'm going to go to Advanced, and I'm going to set the center to 0 here, and I'll hit Apply. So now they don't get punitive colors even though they're better than the average. Let's return to the dashboard. Now we can finally start working on this thing. So I'm going to go here, go to Sheet, and what we need to do is we need to somehow use the parameter that we just built to influence the color of the dots here. So we're going to build a calculation that's going to do that for us. I'm going to mix it up by going here to create the calculation instead of going to Analysis. And for this calculation, first I'm going to say if hospital check equals true. So in other words, if the parameter that is selected corresponds to the hospital dot, then, and then here's where it gets tricky because now we have to do a sort of nested if statement. So now we're going to say then if, I'm going to take question delta for mean cohort, if that thing is less than 0, then I'll say negative. Else if question delta for mean cohort is greater than or equal to 0, then positive. And then I'll say end. But I still have to do one more statement here because I've only ended this inner if statement. So then I'll say end, and then I'll call this color. Then I'll hit apply and OK, and then I'll drag that to color here. I'll go back into colors by just clicking this color button, edit colors. For null, I'm just going to go down to this color palette. I'm going to pick Seattle grays, and I'll pick this dark gray here. For positive, I'll double click on this, and I'll pick a nice sky blue color like this one here. Hit apply. You'll notice that some of these dots aren't appearing. So to fix that, I'm going to right click here, I'm going to go to sort, and I'm going to go to descending, and then all of them should appear. This hospital doesn't have any bad things that happen, so we're going to pick one that did have bad things that happen. So I'm going to go to HCAHPs, I'll scroll down to like one of the worst hospitals here, and I'll click this one. And I like the color that it's already giving me by default, but let me just go back in here and just show you how to change that. Just in case you don't have a good default option, I'll go to color, edit colors, and I'll just click on this red here, hit apply, and then OK. Now I'll go back to the dashboard, and this is looking really good now. I can see all this stuff update, the colors look good. If I switch up my cohorts from, say, medium-sized Washington State hospitals to Wisconsin hospitals, and I click on things, that's updating. This thing could be wider in the header, so I'll just click here, and then fit width, and that fixes that problem. I think the only thing that could make this better is if we give this a tooltip so that it shows us the actual delta value, and I think that will be the final step and we'll be done. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to go to this sheet, I'm going to go to tooltip, and I'm going to say show tooltips. I'll erase this facility name header here, and I'll just make this hospital complete name be the first thing that we see. I'm going to bump that up to maybe a font size of 16. I'm going to make that maybe this blue here. Actually, I'll go down to this drop down, I'll go to more colors, and I'll pick a nice sky blue, and I'll pick maybe this one this time. So I'll click that. I'm going to delete this thing, and I'll say top box answer. And then I'll go to insert, and I'll look for HCAHPS answer description. On the next line, I'll say delta from cohort, and I'll go back to insert, and I'll select the sum question delta for mean cohort. I'm going to make both of these bold. Click OK. That looks pretty good. I think it could pop out a little bit more, so I'll go back and I'll give it a darker text. So maybe I'll pick this one here, and I'll pick this one here and click apply, and that looks good. So let's go back to the dashboard and just inspect everything one last time. That's looking pretty darn good, I think. We don't need a tooltip here, we don't need tooltips here, we don't need tooltips here. I think it's only useful here. and everything is interacting really good. We are finally done. Make sure you save this to Tableau server by going to File, Save to Tableau Public, and then you can upload it to your own personal portfolio, and you can share this amazing dashboard with your hiring manager or your recruiter for the next job that you're applying to. I think they're going to be quite impressed by this dashboard, and if you can put your own personal flair on it, it's going to look even better. Now, I'm sure you're all Tableau'd out by this point, but if you're looking for another tutorial to follow, just like this one, I've got another tutorial that you can follow that shows you how to build a flu shots dashboard that is also pretty cool looking. So check that out if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.